coming on the clouds.
Coming on the clouds, kings and kingdoms will bow down.
Break every chain.
Every chain will break, as broken hearts declare His grace. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring in power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before.
This is our God.
Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chain. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him.
So open up the gates.
So open up the gates. Make way before the King of Kings.
He comes to save.
The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. Who can stop the Lord Almighty?
Oh, our God
is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring in power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before.
Oh, our
God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chain. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before.
Who can stop?
Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty?
Who can stop?
Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the
Our God, hey,
Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring in power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before.
this is our God. Hey,
Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chain. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow.
this is our God.
Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring in power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before.
Oh, our God.
Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chain. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before
Today I want us to look at seeing God's glory in the chaos of the storm. I'd like us to turn our Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 1, and we're going to read from verses 1 to 28, which is the entire chapter. Now it came to pass in the 30th year of the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Kibar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans, by the river Kibar, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself. The brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the colour of amber out of the midst of the fire. Also from within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Each one had 4 faces, and each one had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of calves' feet. They sparkled like the colour of burnished bronze. The hands of a man were under their wings on their 4 sides, and each of the 4 had faces and wings. Their wings touched one another. The creatures did not turn when they went, but each one went straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. Each of the 4 had a face of an ox on the left side. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces. Their wings stretched upward. 2 wings of each one touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies. And each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted to go, and they did not turn when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches going back and forth among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and out of the fire went lightning, and the living creatures ran back and forth in appearance like a flash of lightning. Now as I looked at the living creatures, behold, a wheel was on the earth beside each living creature with its 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their workings was like the colour of beryl, and all 4 had the same likeness. The appearance of their workings was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they moved, they went toward any one of the 4 directions. They did not turn aside when they went. As for their rims, they were so high, they were awesome. And their rims were full of eyes all around the 4 of them. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, because there the Spirit went, and the wheels were lifted together with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And when those went, these went. When those stood, these stood. And when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up together with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The likeness of the firmament above the heads of the living creatures was like the colour of an awesome crystal stretched out over their heads. And under the firmament their wings spread out straight, one toward another. Each one had 2 which covered one side, and each one had 2 which covered the other side of the body. When they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a tumult like the noise of an army. And when they stood still, they let down their wings. A voice came from above the firmament that was over their heads. And whenever they stood, they let down their wings. And above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. Also from the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw, as it were, the colour of amber, with the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his waist and downward, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, with brightness all around. Like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance, the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking. This is an awesome vision that Ezekiel had. And our focus is actually on verse 4. Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself. And brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Let's look at this. First of all, the name Ezekiel means God strengthens. Ezekiel was called by God from being a priest to serving as a prophet. As God's spokesman to the Jewish exiles in the land of Babylon, he would rebuke them for their sins and expose their idolatry. But he would also reveal the glorious future that the Lord had prepared for them. He was 30 years old at the time of his call. That's the normal age of a priest to begin his ministry. And it would have been much easier for Ezekiel to remain a priest. Because you see, priests were highly esteemed by the Jews. And the priest could read the law and learn everything that he needed to know to do his work. Prophets, on the other hand, were usually despised. They were usually persecuted. They received their messages and orders from the Lord as the occasion demanded. And they could never be sure what would happen next. It was dangerous to be a prophet. Most people actually resent being told about their sins, and they prefer to hear messages that would cheer them. They don't want to hear declarations of judgment. So Ezekiel was a young Hebrew priest who was a visionary and who had a vivid imagination. He was a descendant of the family of Zadok, the notable Hebrew priest who could actually trace his lineage directly to Aaron, the brother of Moses. The family of Zadok was one of the noblest families in Jerusalem. Ezekiel was well educated and exposed to the highest culture in Jerusalem, the highest culture that could be even afforded in Jerusalem. Then one day, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came with his armies and laid siege against Jerusalem. And King Jehoiachin of Judah, he surrendered the city to Nebuchadnezzar. And 7,000 of the best people in the city, including members of the priestly families, the nobility, the artisans, the skilled people, were taken away captive to Babylon. And among these captives was the young priest, Ezekiel. Apparently, Ezekiel was a man of some wealth, and doubtlessly he took a considerable portion of his wealth with him. So he had a home, a wife, possibly a family, and he lived in comparative ease and comfort on the banks of the Kibar River near a place called Tel Aviv, which was not many miles from the city of Babylon. The fact that these Hebrew exiles in Babylon were being treated well, it didn't compensate for the inner agony of soul, the frustration of being torn away from their beloved homeland. They had to leave their beloved Jerusalem. They had to leave the temple, the presence of God in the most holy place. In our day, it's difficult to understand the agony of Ezekiel and his fellow countrymen. But they were God's unique, chosen people. Even though they had sinned against him, and they'd done this repeatedly, and now they were suffering the consequences of their disobedience, they knew they were a people of destiny. I want us, first of all, to see if we can sense some of Ezekiel's agony. The time is late in what we would call the month of June, about 593 years before Christ was born. A dust storm had swirled out of the desert into the flat, irrigated plain where Ezekiel may have been interceding with other captives. This is when the Lord called him into his new ministry. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel in the form of a vision, and the hand of the Lord laid hold of him and claimed him for special service. When a dust storm comes, most people, they would hide their faces from the smarting, gritty particles of dust, and try to stop them from getting into their eyes. But we're told that Ezekiel faced the storm, and while it was buffeting him in its fury, he saw light, motion, and glory. As the vivid imagination of this young piece was activated, God revealed himself to him out of this storm cloud. You see, as the Kibar River flowed through the fertile plains of Babylon, it had seemed to be silently mocking Ezekiel as he stood there before this storm appeared. It was like it's saying, your God has failed you. As he stood there and looked out, it was like it was saying, where is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Where is the God who lives in your precious temple in Jerusalem? And as Ezekiel faced the river, this is what seemed to shout in derision to him. It was as though he was doomed to a biological existence until he died and his family laid his body in this alien soil. He'd grown up believing himself to be an heir of God's promise to Abraham, but the future contained for him no promise, as he was there in exile, no hope, no God. Crises that are almost intolerable come into all of our lives. Eventually, we adjust to the tragedy of losing a loved one. But living trouble never goes away. And this was Ezekiel's plight. He could not turn away from his bitterness, this loneliness from his homeland and for his God. But many of his people were adjusting. And it seemed to Ezekiel that the terrible cancer of complacency was eating away at them. Then, suddenly, as he's there looking over the Kibar River, we see this despondent, broken-hearted man. It's as if he suddenly squared his shoulders as if to say, no, I will not give in to my feelings. I will not say it is all over. Our God is the only God, and he is all-powerful. He knows where we are. And then we see in that moment the intense delight, ecstasy of Ezekiel. As this lonely exile stood on the riverbank, he saw a dark cloud coming from the north. The storm cloud was what people now call a dust devil. And there are times during the day when a dust devil may be filled with strange iridescent colors as the sun glints against the sand particles, filling the cloud. Ezekiel watched, afraid but fascinated, while the storm cloud drew nearer. Slowly, with the eyes of spiritual vision, he began to see shining through the dust, that dust cloud, the infinite glory of God. And to Ezekiel, it was the blazing, dazzling flame of hope. And most of chapter 1 describes the chariot throne, as we've just read, upon which this glory rode. You see, kings rode in chariots in those days. So Ezekiel saw a conqueror's chariot coming down from the home of the Babylonian gods who dwelt, according to pagan belief, in the mountain, the mysterious mountains to the north. With the Spirit of God activating the creative imagination of this young priest who's making the transition to become a prophet, Ezekiel set about to describe what he saw. You see, sometimes it's difficult for us to understand the poetic oriental symbolism of Ezekiel. But we need to remember that Ezekiel is using all that he had, human words, words invented to describe what a person sees and feels around himself or herself, to describe the glory of God. Can you imagine the frustration he felt as he began to probe into his vocabulary, trying to come up with words with which to describe God? What does it boil down to? Man cannot describe God, but we can know that he knows us and can reveal himself to us in his own unique way, even in a dust devil of a storm. So the first chapter in Ezekiel's book is symbolism, and it's designed to help us think about the majesty, the glory, and the magnificence of God. What is a symbol? It is the use of one thing to suggest another. And there are three things we need to remember about symbols that will actually help us to understand not only Ezekiel, but many other portions of the Bible. First of all, a symbol doesn't need to look, sound, smell, or taste like the thing symbolized. All it must do is suggest an idea. Secondly, a symbol speaks to our imagination. When the captain of a ship sees a green light in the darkness, he imagines another ship and can tell in what direction it is going. And the third thing about a symbol is a symbol can have many meanings, and not always does it symbolize the same thing. Jesus used symbols often. For example, he said, "I am the door." He said he was the door. We understand that. Symbols of God in Scripture bring us close to him. Then we see God in the storm as Ezekiel describes him to us. All through the Bible, we find rich symbolism in numbers. The number 4 usually represents this world. We've told of the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds, the 4 seasons. This chariot throne that Ezekiel saw in the midst of the storm cloud is described in terms of 4. There were 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings. They were piloting a 4-wheeled vehicle. What did it mean? It meant that the glory of God filled the whole earth. He was not confined to a temple or a church, nor was he enthroned in some distant heaven. He was here by the Kibar River, ready to comfort and strengthen Ezekiel. He is here by my river of crisis, of trouble, of heartbreak, whatever the name. And what else do we see about Ezekiel's chariot? It had wheels. The wheel is a symbol of motion. We do not worship a God who is impassive. God is a God of personality who loves us and knows us by name. He is a God of action, of accomplishment. The eyes in Ezekiel's vision symbolized the seeing God, a God of total awareness concerning his creatures. Through this experience, Ezekiel came to know God, not just about him, but to actually know him. As I conclude, Ezekiel and his people knew the facts of faith. But when they came to the Kibar River and all that it represented, facts were not enough. They needed a first-hand meeting with God. You see, when we surrender to him, he teaches us to open our eyes while the snow or the sandstorm is blowing. And through all of that chaos and horror, he shows us his glory. And we hear him say, "I am with you always, even to the end of the world." We begin to grasp the message that God was giving his servant. Though his people were in exile and their nation was about to be destroyed, God was still on the throne and able to handle every situation. In his marvelous providence, he moves in the affairs of nations and works his hidden plan. Israel wasn't a victim of Babylonian aggression. It was God who enabled the Babylonians to conquer his people and chasten them for their rebellion. But God would also bring the Medes and the Persians to conquer Babylon. And Cyrus, king of Persia, would permit the Jews to return to their land. In Romans 11:33 we read, "Oh, the depths of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out." No matter what message God gave him to preach, or what opposition arose from the people, Ezekiel would be encouraged and strengthened because he had seen the mighty throne of God in the midst of the fiery trial. He had seen the glory of God in the chaos. And we too, if we come to a place where we know our God, we will stand with our eyes wide open in the midst of every dust storm and see God on his throne and know we have the victory. Amen.
Oh, to Jesus I surrender. All to him I freely give. My God. I will ever love and trust him in his presence daily. We